Hi everyone, and welcome back. I am Dr. Flux, and this is the third lecture in Module 10 of General Psychology, discussing personality and social influence. Today, we're going to dive into a question that might really make you think. How much of you is really you? We like to believe that our actions, choices, and beliefs come from deep inside, that they're expressions of our unique personality or our moral compass. But as it turns out, we're deeply influenced by the people around us, even in ways that we don't always notice. This lecture is all about social influence on behavior, how situations, groups, and authority figures can shape what we do. We'll explore several famous experiments that reveal just how powerful these influences are, and you might be surprised or even a little bit uncomfortable by how much of your behavior can be shaped by forces outside of your control. Before we dive in, let's take a moment to review what we covered in Lecture 10.2. Which of the following best describes a key limitation of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI? A. It includes too many personality dimensions. B. It lacks reliability and often produces inconsistent results. C. It was developed using machine learning. Or D. It's only applicable in clinical settings. The answer here is B. It lacks reliability and often produces inconsistent results. One of the biggest scientific criticisms of the MBTI is its low test-retest reliability. Many people receive different personality types when taking the test again after just a few weeks, which suggests it doesn't consistently measure stable traits. Let's do another one. Why are dimensional models considered more scientifically valid than categorical models? A. They focus on emotional traits. B. They're easier to score by hand. C. They account for the complexity and variability of human personality. Or D. They use fewer variables to define personality. If you chose C, you've got it. Dimensional models don't force people into rigid categories. Instead, they measure traits along spectrums, offering a more nuanced and empirically supported way to understand how people differ. Here's what we'll be tackling today. We'll start by diving into conformity. How much do we change our behavior just to fit in? We'll look at a few famous experiments which show how easily we can be swayed by the people around us or our context. Next up is obedience. Why do people follow orders, even when it goes against their morals? We'll break down Stanley Milgram's infamous obedience study, one of the most important and ethically controversial experiments in psychology. And finally, we'll explore compliance, the subtle ways we're influenced to say yes, even when we might want to say no. Then we'll wrap up with our conclusion and review. By the end of this lecture, you'll have a deeper understanding of just how much your environment and the people in it can shape your thoughts, feelings, and actions. All right, let's begin with something we're all likely familiar with: trying to fit in. Conformity is one of our main strategies when it comes to fitting in, and we conform more often than we realize. So what exactly is conformity? It's when we change our behavior, thoughts, or beliefs to match those of a group. There are two main types of conformity. Normative conformity is when you change your behavior to fit with the group, even if you don't agree internally. Think about laughing at a joke you don't find funny because everyone else is cracking up. You don't want to be the odd one out. Informational conformity is when you change your beliefs because you think the group has more information or is more knowledgeable. Like when you're unsure of an answer in class and you go along with what others are saying because you assume it must be right. Both types of conformity are powerful, and as we'll see, they can influence our behavior in surprising ways. One of the most famous studies on conformity was conducted by Solomon Asch in 1951. Here's how it worked. Participants were shown a line and asked to choose the matching line from a set of 3 options. The correct answer was obvious, but here's the twist. The participant was placed in a group with several actors, also known as confederates, who were all in on the experiment. These actors were instructed to intentionally give the wrong answer. Now imagine you're in that situation. You know the right answer, but everyone else in the room confidently picks the wrong one. What do? Do you stick to your guns, or do you go along with the group? Turns out most people conformed. About 75% of participants went along with the wrong answer at least once, even though it was clearly incorrect. This study showed just how powerful peer pressure can be. Even when we know something's wrong, the desire to fit in can make us question our own judgment. This example shows how peer pressure can influence us to go along with the group, even when we know it's wrong. But what happens when people aren't just part of a group, but assigned to a role within a system? This brings us to another infamous study in psychology, Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo wanted to explore how social roles, like prisoner and guard, can influence behavior. So he set up a mock prison in the basement of Stanford University and recruited 24 male college students to participate. The students were randomly assigned to be either prisoners or guards. What started out as a role-playing exercise quickly spiraled out of control. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. Zimbardo had to shut it down after just 6 days. Why? Because the situation had become too real. The guards, wearing uniforms and mirrored sunglasses to de-individuate them, began to act with increasing aggression. They enforced arbitrary punishments, used psychological manipulation, and even created their own hierarchy of power. Meanwhile, the prisoners, who had been arrested at their homes and stripped of their identities, became passive, anxious, and depressed. Some broke down emotionally. People were no longer acting. They were becoming their roles. Even Zimbardo himself, who played the prison superintendent, admitted that he lost perspective and began to prioritize the prison over the well-being of the participants. So what did the study show? It revealed how easily situational forces and assigned roles can override personal morals and values. The students who played guards weren't inherently cruel, but when placed in a system that gave them power and authority, many became abusive. And the prisoners? They internalized helplessness, even though they could have left the study at any time. Zimbardo's study is often seen as a powerful example of situational conformity, how people can act in ways completely out of character when placed in environments that encourage certain behaviors. It also helps us understand how systems and structures, not just individuals, can lead to unethical or harmful behavior. But like Milgram's study, the Stanford Prison Experiment sparked major ethical concerns. Today, it's criticized for lack of proper oversight, unclear boundaries, and the psychological harm caused to participants. And while some researchers question how authentic that behavior really was, it remains one of the most cited examples of the power of social roles and environment. It forces us to ask, are we really in control of our behavior, or do we just play the part in whatever situation we find ourselves in? So why do we conform even when we know something's off? The answers align with the types of conformity that we discussed earlier. The first reason is the simple desire to fit in. This is called normative influence. We conform because we don't want to stand out or be rejected. Fitting in feels safe and socially rewarding. The second reason is that we believe the group must know better. This is the informational influence. Especially in situations where we're unsure or things are ambiguous, we assume that others have more knowledge or expertise. And finally, we conform because of social norms and expectations. From a young age, we're taught to follow the rules, meet expectations, and keep the peace. Conforming helps maintain harmony in groups, which can be essential for survival and success in social environments, even when it can also go terribly wrong. Let's reflect. Have you ever gone along with a group even when you knew they were wrong? Why did you do it? Was it to fit in, or because you doubted yourself? Was there another reason? Do you think you'd resist conformity if everyone else was headed in the wrong direction? It's easy to say we'd stand our ground, but as Ash's experiment and the Zimbardo prison experiment both show, peer pressure and situational conformity can be a lot stronger than we think. Alright, so we've seen how conformity can make us go along with the crowd, even when we know the group is wrong. But what happens when we're faced with an authority figure giving us direct orders? Do we stand our ground, or do we obey, even if it means going against our own morals? That's where obedience comes in, and to explore it, we're going to look back at another controversial and famous experiment in psychology, Stanley Milgram's obedience study. So what exactly is obedience? Obedience is when we follow direct orders from an authority figure. It's different from conformity, which is more about going along with the crowd. With obedience, there's someone in charge, and they're telling you exactly what to do. Now, obedience isn't always a bad thing. It can lead to positive outcomes, like following laws, respecting teachers, or listening to medical professionals. But it can also lead to destructive behavior when people follow orders blindly. The big question is, how far are people willing to go when an authority figure tells them to do something they know is wrong? Well, let's find out. Stanley Milgram conducted his famous and shocking experiments in 1961. Milgram wanted to understand how far people would go in obeying authority, and the experiment was set up like this. People were told that they were part of a study on learning and memory. They were instructed to play the role of a teacher, delivering electric shocks to a learner who was actually an actor or a confederate. The participant was to shock this person whenever they gave a wrong answer. Now, the shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. As the shocks increased, the actor would start to scream in pain, beg them to stop, and eventually they would go silent, as if they passed out from pain or worse. This is when an authority figure in a lab coat would calmly tell the participants to continue, saying things like, "The experiment requires that you continue." They said this even when the impact on the person who was supposedly receiving the shocks became dangerous and extreme. So what happened? A staggering 65% of participants delivered the maximum shock, even when they thought that they were seriously harming or potentially killing another person. This study revealed just how far people will go in obeying authority, even when it goes against their own morals. There's a lesser-known but equally disturbing study by Sheridan and King in 1972. This experiment took Milgram's findings to a different level, testing obedience in a situation that feels even more emotionally intense. It was called the puppy experiment, and this is how it worked. Participants were told that they were helping to train a puppy using electric shocks. Whenever the puppy made a mistake, they were instructed to press a button that would deliver a shock. But unlike in Milgram's experiment, where the learner was just pretending to be shocked, this time the shocks were real. The puppy would whimper, yelp, and even jump in pain. A staggering 77% of participants continued to deliver shocks up to the maximum level, even as the puppy appeared to be in severe distress. The puppy experiment is deeply disturbing and hard to think about. Our ethics around animal studies have thankfully developed considerably since then. But this experiment drives home the unsettling truth about just how far people will go when instructed by an authority figure. So why do people obey even when they know what they're doing is wrong? Well, first, there's the power of authority. We're conditioned to trust and follow people in positions of power, whether it's doctors, teachers, or leaders. Even symbols of authority, like a lab coat or a uniform, can make us more likely to obey. Then there's the diffusion of responsibility. When we're following orders, we don't feel as personally responsible for the outcome. It's easy to think, I'm just doing what I was told. Another factor is gradual escalation. In Milgram's experiments, the shocks didn't start at the upper limit of 450 volts. They increased slowly, making it easier for participants to justify continuing. Once you agree to something small, it's easier to agree to something bigger. And finally, we're socialized from a young age to respect authority and follow instructions, even when we don't fully understand why. This obedience norm becomes deeply ingrained in our patterns. Milgram's study didn't just reveal the dark side of obedience, it also sparked a major conversation about the ethics of psychological research. Many participants experienced extreme distress, believing that they had seriously harmed someone. This raised questions about whether it's ethical to put people in situations that cause psychological harm, even in the name of science. Because of studies like this, we now have much stricter ethical guidelines in research. Participants must give informed consent, be fully aware of potential risks, and have the right to withdraw at any time, as we discussed in our research methods module earlier in the course. But despite the ethical concerns, Milgram's findings are still incredibly relevant today. They help us understand events like war crimes, corporate scandals, and instances where people commit harmful acts under authority pressure. It's a powerful reminder that obedience isn't always harmless, and that even ordinary people can commit extraordinary acts when influenced by authority. Let's do a quick attention check. What did Stanley Milgram's obedience study reveal? A. People rarely follow orders if they believe it will harm others. B. Most people refuse to obey authority figures in stressful situations. C. A majority of people will obey authority figures even when it conflicts with their morals. Or D. Obedience only happens in military settings. If you picked C, you're right. Milgram's study showed that a majority of people will obey authority figures even when it goes against what they believe is right. So far, we've talked about conformity, how we adjust our behaviors to fit in with a group, and obedience, how we follow orders from authority figures, even when we might not want to. But what about those everyday situations where someone persuades you to do something, not through direct orders, but through subtle social cues? That's where compliance comes in. So what exactly is compliance? Compliance is when you agree to a request from someone who doesn't have direct authority over you. It's different from conformity and obedience because it's not about fitting in with a group or following an order. Instead, it's about how people use subtle social tactics to get you to say yes. Think about times when you've lent a friend money after they asked repeatedly, bought something you didn't need because the salesperson gave you a free sample, or maybe donated to charity because someone complimented you or made you feel guilty. These are all examples of compliance at work. Let's break down some of the most common techniques, and trust me, you've probably experienced most of them. The foot in the door technique starts with a small request. Once you say yes, you're more likely to agree to something bigger later. Think of it like dipping your toe in the water before getting fully submerged. The door in the face technique flips this around. It starts with a huge request that you're almost guaranteed to refuse, followed by a smaller one that feels reasonable by comparison. Ever been first asked to donate a massive amount of money and then given a smaller option? In contrast, the smaller donation doesn't seem as bad. The lowball technique is all about getting you to agree to something cheap or easy and then revealing hidden costs after you've already committed. This is a classic move at car dealerships. Then there's the that's not all technique. It's the hallmark of late-night infomercials which dominated the 90s. But wait, there's more. By throwing in extras before you can say no, they make it harder to walk away. And finally, there is the principle of reciprocity. We're wired to feel obligated to return favors, even when we didn't ask for them. Have you ever tried a free sample at a grocery store and suddenly felt like you should buy the product, even if you don't really want it? That little taste wasn't just generosity, it was a strategy. We've covered some big ideas today, and I hope it's got you thinking about just how much of your behavior is influenced by the world around you. Here's some key takeaways. We explored how conformity shapes our actions, even when we know a group is wrong. Ash's line experiment showed just how powerful peer pressure can be, and Zimbardo's prison experiment showed us how our situational roles can shape our behavior. We saw how obedience to authority can lead people to follow orders they never thought they would, as demonstrated in Milgram's shocking study. And finally, we uncovered how compliance works in subtle ways, through persuasion techniques that influence us to say yes more often than we realize. We like to believe we're in full control of our actions, that we're independent thinkers, immune to the sway of peer pressure, authority figures, or clever persuasion tactics. But as we've seen, even the most confident and self-assured people can be influenced by situations they find themselves in. Before we wrap up, let's see how much stuck with you. Which experiment demonstrated how people conform to group pressure, even when they know the group is wrong? Is it A, Milgram's obedience study, B, Ash's line experiment, C, Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, or D, the bystander effect? If you picked B, you're right. Ash's line experiment showed that people will conform to the group even when they know the group is wrong. Which of the following is an example of the foot in the door technique? A, a friend asks for $100 right away, but then lowers the request to $10. B, a charity sends you free stickers in the mail and then asks for a donation. C, a salesperson asks you to sign a petition, then later asks you to make a purchase. Or D, a store offers a product at a low price, but adds fees after you commit to buying. The correct answer here is C. The foot in the door technique works by getting someone to agree to a small request first, which increases the likelihood that they'll agree to a larger request later. Signing a petition is a small, easy yes, and that small commitment can make it harder to say no to the follow-up ask. So what do we do with all this information? Understanding social influence doesn't just help us make sense of psychology experiments, it helps us navigate real life. Whether it's recognizing when we're being subtly persuaded, resisting peer pressure, or thinking critically about authority, these insights give us tools to be more aware and intentional in our actions. The next time you find yourself going along with the crowd, following orders, or saying yes when you want to say no, take a moment to ask yourself, is this really my choice? Or is something else at play? Thanks for sticking with me on this informative and sometimes disturbing exploration of social influence. As always, stay curious, stay resilient, and above all, live life in flux. I'll see you in the next module.